Hello, my beautiful blossoms, blooms, and buds. I'm Rosebud Reads, and welcome to my book garden. Welcome for a very special stream. So, this is actually a re recording of Peerless, Book 5, chapters 181 through 186. So that was the day when we had really bad storms where I live, and the Wi-Fi was everywhere. And I've actually had some comments saying, "Hey, this is pretty unintelligible, like it's staticky, it's really hard to listen to it." And it had a lot of really important information and things happening. So I decided since I took this week off, I would try and record this when I had a little extra time. So that's what I'm doing. But as usual, this is a pretty chill stream. It's gonna be a bit more of a straight read through, maybe with a couple side comments. But I'm recording this just by myself because this was not planned. And it's kind of out of order, so I felt like it'd be a little weird for me to just stream this, especially since we're in the middle of copper coins right now. But is what it is. So this is a mature stream. There will be mature aspects. That could be gore, that could be sexy times. I might censor it a little bit if it gets graphic, or there might be trigger warnings. There's not trigger warnings for this part. I know this because we already went through it, and I did not put trigger warnings in that one. I am not sponsored. I don't make anything from this. I do this because I can, because I want to, and just because I enjoy doing it. If I ever do get sponsored, you guys will be the first to know. But yes, I am also not fluent. I do my best, but sometimes I may pronounce something incorrectly or in a very interesting way. I am open to constructive criticism, but please be kind. But that being said, let's go ahead and get into it. I'm going to do a little bit of a recap, so I'm just going to reread a little bit from before because it's probably been a while since you heard this. But anyway, let's just go ahead and get into it. It is 2:45. Ooh, it'd be great if my pen worked. All right. Okay. Feng Xiao had no idea He Zhang felt so sorry for him. So this is when the emperor is entering the temple to do the ceremony. So he has just entered the temple. Feng Xiao is hiding as a monk, and so this is from his perspective. But yes, Feng Xiao had no idea He Zhang felt so sorry for him. In fact, he hadn't intended to infiltrate Da Xingshan Temple, but he'd only just escaped the Ministry of Justice and desperately needed to wash and change his clothes. Returning to Jijian Bureau was not an option. Only if he remained in the shadows would he pose a threat to the enemy. He'd been contemplating finding a brothel and pretending he was a wandering gentleman in order to rid himself of the stench when he passed Da Xingshan Temple. The smell of sandalwood and the soft sounds of chanting had stopped him in his tracks. In the distance, a young monk happened to be returning to the temple. A brilliant idea bloomed in Feng Xiao's mind. He could never previously have given up all his worldly attachments, but things had changed. After marinating in the smell of chamber pots for hours, his nose seemed to be broken. Everything still reeked. He'd need to wash his hair 10 times at least. Psychological scarring was difficult to heal. Why not start anew? His neurotic need for cleanliness was the deciding factor. He crept up behind the returning monk, a young man named Kong Yun, and knocked him out cold. After tapping his sleep acupoints, he tossed him under a bridge on the outskirts of the city with some water and dry rations. The unfortunate young man wouldn't be back for several days, and Feng Xiao only needed one. He Zhang's stumble was no accident. Feng Xiao deliberately led him toward the protruding brick. No matter how well one concealed their martial prowess, it was difficult to suppress reflexes. But He Zhang's reaction had been that of an ordinary person. He couldn't be an infiltrator. Feng Xiao promptly turned his attention elsewhere. Throughout the day, he'd wandered all over the temple under various pretexts and seen no suspicious individuals. But it was possible they were too well hidden for him to find by simply walking around. Feng Er furrowed his brow, then smoothed it, resuming the act of a silent and dutiful monk. The Emperor sat on the mat for a long time, but the chanting failed to soothe him. A restless beast seemed to pace anxiously within his chest. The war with the Gokturks had lasted 3 years. The previous dynasty had attempted to secure peace with the Khaganate through marriage, but the Emperor of Su refused to compromise. He opted to steadily grind the Gokturks down. He sent envoys to sow discord among the tribes while also engaging them in open battle. This combination of soft and hard tactics had ultimately forced Ishbara Khagan to sue for peace. It was an achievement on par with those of Qin Shi Huang, first to unify the disparate nations of the land, or the legendary Emperor Wu of Han. The Emperor himself was exceedingly pleased. Even if he didn't order it, future history text would surely chronicle his contributions in vivid detail. Yet this joy had been unexpectedly dampened by a series of setbacks. Someone had sought to catch him off guard with the solar eclipse. This much was true, but while the enemy could bribe Hong Yuan, they couldn't control the heavens. Could it be that he really shouldn't have usurped the Yuans? At last, the Buddhist rites came to a close, and the monks lining the walls quietly departed. At the center of the vast Mahavira hall, only Master Ling Zhang and the Emperor remained. Even He Zhang had retreated to a corner. Without waiting for the Emperor's orders, he closed the doors, giving them privacy to converse. Master Ling Zhang and the Emperor sat face to face, both silent. A long time passed. Was I too ruthless in eradicating the Yuan family? The Emperor seemed to be asking himself as much as Master Ling Zhang. Your Majesty already knows the answer in your heart, said Master Ling Zhang. Why do you ask me? The Emperor's voice was hoarse. No dynasty yields to another without bloodshed. What choice did I have? His voice trailed off. Despite his justifications, he couldn't rid himself of his guilt. Master Ling Zhang sighed. Heads are not like chives, Your Majesty. Once you cut them off, they will not grow back. Your Majesty understands this well. Your recent disquiet is due to your own inner demons. However, the new dynasty you've established, one that stabilizes our borders and eases the burdens on the people, has greatly benefited the common folk. Such progress would never have been possible under the previous dynasty. Each year, countless civilians on the borders face slaughter or capture at the hands of the Gokturks. The line between good and evil is not a clear one. You've taken lives, yet you've also done great deeds. We cannot generalize. Your Majesty does what your Majesty must. Remember your guilt over the Yuan family and become merciful. Hundreds of years from now, when all these events are history, the people of the future shall come to their own conclusions. The Emperor's old friend was a monk through and through, and often spoke in abstruse terms that made it hard for ordinary folk to understand him. It was rare for him to offer such candid words of comfort. After days of being repressed, the emperor's emotions finally surged to the fore. Eyes reddening at the rims, he forced a smile. Truly, you understand me best. Master Ling Zhang's counsel had banished half his worries in one stroke. Allow me to recite a sutra for your majesty, suggested Master Ling Zhang. The emperor nodded. I would be much obliged. Master Ling Zhang didn't overthink his choice. He casually recited a passage from the Surangama Sutra. The emperor didn't need to hear him recite any text in particular. All he needed was inner peace. Don't we all? 1,000 words from a bystander were nothing compared to a single moment of self-enlightenment. Master Ling Zhan recited the sutra, his words like flowing water. His voice was aged, yet it wasn't hoarse, but filled with a tranquility brought about by the slow ebb of time. The fragrance of sandalwood permeated the air as the rhythmic sound of chanting filled the hall. Gradually, the emperor slipped into a reverie. Scenes of the past flitted before his eyes. His first meeting with Emperor Wu of Shou in his youth, when they'd enjoyed a hearty conversation. Emperor Wu of Zhou pointed at Crown Prince Yuan Yun and saying, I have a brilliant son and you have a lovely daughter. Would they not be a perfect match? Emperor Wu of Shou listening to the words of the soothsayer that had led him to gradually distance himself from Yang Jian and grow suspicious of him. Their peaceful relationship as ruler and subject had devolved into hostility. He'd endured and compromised for many years until Emperor Wu finally passed. Only then did he breathe a sigh of relief. Kindness and enmity, fondness and hate. It was no longer clear with whom each had originated. But the Yuan family had never killed a single member of the Yang clan. On the contrary, it was he who had exterminated them root and branch. If Emperor Wu was in the underworld now, could he let go of his grievances with a smile? The emperor slowly turned to look at the giant statue of the Buddha in front of him, as if hoping to glean some answer from the bodhisattva's fate and a mysterious smile. The bodhisattva's eyes were lowered, its lips shaped in a soft curve. Suddenly, the curve widened, pulling eerily on the face until its entire expression warped. Its golden gaze swung over to rest upon the emperor. The emperor's eyes widened in shock. He froze as if struck by lightning. Quiet laughter drifted into his ears, pitched first high and then low, echoing ominously through the halls. The emperor's first thought was that someone had intruded on them. But he soon realized the eerie chuckles came not from any living person, but from the mouths of the 24 celestial statues lining either side of the hall. The Buddha statue's uncanny grin sharpened. The statue's arm swung down too fast for him to evade. The emperor cried out as a heavy hand clapped him on the shoulder. He collapsed backward. Your Majesty! The emperor jolted awake. His face was white as a sheet, cold sweat sheening his brow. But there was no demonic Buddha statue, only Master Ling Zhang's worried face looking down at him. Okay, so that's kind of a hearty recap just because it's been so long since we finished it. So now, after a quick sip, we will go ahead and start chapter 181. All right, let me mark down the time real quick. 14:45. Okay, chapter 181. The hall was still, unchanged from when he had entered. The scent of sandalwood curled around them. The bodhisattva's eyes remained lowered, compassionate and serene amid the ringing of Buddhist bells. The emperor gasped, his chest heaving. Only when his palms slipped on the mat did he realize that his hands were so sweaty they'd almost soaked the cushion beneath him. His heart was racing. When he looked around, the statue still seemed to hold a faint hint of uncanny savagery. The eerie, indistinct laughter lingered in his ears, etched into his memory. What happened? You nearly succumbed to your inner demons, Your Majesty. Master Ling Zhang sighed. The Emperor's mental distress was more severe than he thought. He was in a temple surrounded by Buddhas, awash in their bells and sutras, yet he was becoming more and more agitated. I heard the howling and weeping of ghosts, the Emperor said. They clung to me, refusing to rest. They tried to drag me to hell with them. The Emperor's back was still clammy with sweat. Somehow he felt this place was tainted, though he knew it to be impossible. Dashingshan Temple had been renowned for 300 years. What wandering ghosts or malevolent spirits would dare dance in front of the bodhisattvas who had stood here for centuries? He met Master Ling Zhang's eyes and found himself unable to speak this thought aloud. Perhaps I'm simply too tired. While this old monk was wandering the lands, said Master Ling Zhang, I learned of a calming drought that can soothe the mind and settle the spirit. Allow me to write it down for you later. You can ask the imperial physicians to look it over before you decide to use it. The Emperor's smile was stiff. Thank you. Seeing how listless he was, Master Ling Zhang set aside the recitation of sutras. He instructed He Zhang to open the doors and support the emperor into a side room for rest. The Buddhist ceremony was a 3-day affair, with the second portion beginning in the afternoon. If nothing went awry, the emperor would fast and pray for 3 days. Afterward, the court would pass down an edict acknowledging the emperor's wrongs and seeking forgiveness from heaven, and the matter would be laid to rest. That's completely not ominous. Like, if nothing went awry, that's not setting up for anything. The officials were still waiting in Tianwang Hall, unaware of what had transpired. All they knew was that the emperor had exited quickly and that his complexion was poor. Dashingshan Temple took up an entire block by itself, and there was plenty of room within to accommodate the imperial entourage and ministers. During the afternoon ritual, Qingzi and the others followed the attending monks into the main hall so they could listen from the edges of the room. But the emperor never made an appearance. Asleep in the side room, he was dreaming a long dream. He dreamed again of Yuan Yang, as well as his son-in-law, Yuan Yun, and the many people that he'd killed. They were resurrected in his nightmare, their faces drenched in blood as they pursued him, intent on exacting revenge. The emperor fled them in his dreams until, exhausted, he finally struggled to wakefulness. As he gazed up at the sky outside the window, he realized night had descended. Hezong's gentle voice drifted into his ears. Your Majesty, you slept soundly all afternoon. Master Ling Zhang said it was a good thing. The rituals are best performed with a sincere heart, so I hesitated to disturb your slumber. How is your Majesty feeling now? Would you like some dinner? The emperor rubbed his forehead. He felt a lingering grogginess, as if he had yet to recover from the afternoon's vision, but he was in somewhat better spirits after his rest. He murmured in affirmation, and He Zhang quickly jogged out. He returned with a group of monks carrying all sorts of vegetarian dishes. Today feels colder than yesterday, the emperor ventured. Yes, it's snowing outside. Zhang fetched a cloak and draped it over him. Tell the kitchen to prepare some warming ginger soup and have it sent to Yu Qingzi and the soldiers. Zhang bowed in acknowledgement and smiled. You are very considerate, Your Majesty. This humble servant never thought of doing that. He ordered a young eunuch to stay behind while he busied himself with the emperor's orders. The emperor casually picked some scriptures from a nearby bookshelf, reading as he ate. A deafening roar echoed in the distance, the muted growl of rolling thunder. Snow and thunder at the same time? Startled, the emperor turned to look outside, his pleasant mood vanishing in an instant. He'd encountered thunder during snowfall once in his youth and felt no sense of foreboding at the time. But considering the series of strange occurrences over the past few days, even the slightest abnormality, such as heart racing. After today's horrifying visions, he was paranoid and jumping at shadows. Another wave of thunder rumbled, clap echoing after clap as the snowflakes drifted down. That's gotta be such a cool thing to see, though. Like, literally, thunder, lightning, and snow at the same time. Like, that's gotta be amazing to experience. Like, I know he's not enjoying it right now, but that sounds so cool. He knew he wouldn't be the only one disturbed. First the eclipse, now a thunderstorm in winter. The common folk would also start to entertain wild ideas about omens. Unsettled, he could no longer focus on the scriptures. He dropped the book on the desk. Come, he said to the eunuch, let us go for a walk. He would call on Master Ling Zhang. Right now, the abbot was the only one who could understand him, the only one who could bring him hope. The clever young eunuch understood at once. He hurried out, questioning monks along the way, until he was told that Master Ling Zhan was still in the main hall, then returned to lead the emperor there. As night settled over the city, Da Xingshan Temple fell into a deep and unnerving silence. Guards patrolled the grounds, and torches cast a flickering light against the stone walls. Ancient trees thronged outside, their branches cloaking the paths that had been tranquil during the day in thick and eerie shadows. Perhaps it was the drop in temperature, or perhaps the sinister scenery. A shiver went up the young eunuch's spine. He dared not rub his arms with the emperor nearby, but he could feel the fine hairs on his body standing on end. At last they approached the main hall. Bright light spilled from the cracks in the tightly shut doors and windows. On a blizzard-filled night like this, leaving the doors open would only extinguish the candles. The young eunuch was about to step forward to announce the emperor's presence when the emperor held up a hand. He took a few steps forward himself and pushed the door open a crack. It was late at night, yet Master Ling Zhan was still in the hall. The emperor didn't wish to disturb him if he was attending to important matters. He peered carefully inside. What he saw left him frozen with terror. It was a sight he'd never forget for the rest of his life. Master Ling Zhan was indeed in the main hall. Through the hall, though the hall was lit by bright candlelight, the abbot was the only one there. He sat cross-legged on the floor with a basin placed before him. The vessel was wide and shallow, like the paper burning basins used in funerary rites, but this wasn't what caught the emperor's attention. He glimpsed something far more horrific. The basin was filled to the brim with bloody entrails. Master Ling Zhan scooped up gory handfuls, his head lowered as he shoved them into his mouth and chewed. Blood dribbled from the corners of his lips. As the Emperor watched, he paused and licked the blood from his hands as if he hadn't had enough. The Emperor's mind went blank. Was he still trapped in his nightmares? He staggered back a few steps, then his legs gave out and he fell to the ground. The young eunuch dove to help him, but was dragged down as well. Your Majesty? What's wrong? Your Majesty! Through the narrow crack in the door, he saw Master Ling Zan's head turned toward him. A twisted grin split his blood-smeared face. Trembling in fear, the Emperor forced a cry past his frozen throat. Help! Someone! Come quickly! As his voice rang out, the sounds of shouts and the distant clash of swords rose from the direction of the monks' quarters. By the back courtyard, the Emperor whipped his head around. What's happening? Protect His Majesty! The cry went up as the Imperial guards around the main hall gathered swiftly before him. The Emperor finally felt some small measure of relief. Shao Yang, he ordered the captain. Go find out what's going on. He paused and pointed at the hall. And there, go in and bring out Master Ling Zhang. The guards dispersed, leaving a small group clustered around the Emperor, scanning their surroundings with wary expressions. Something terrible had happened, but the Emperor wasn't worried yet. Yu Qingzi and the others were still present. These were men who'd fought their way out of the battlefield, famous generals who'd slaughtered countless enemies. Whatever petty ruffians were causing trouble here were no match for them. Yet just as the thought occurred to him, the guards surrounding the Emperor suddenly cried out and crumpled to the ground. Before the Emperor could react, 2 men in black grabbed him and dragged him into the hall. Dun dun dun! Sorry, 1 second. Okay. Chapter 182. The men bound the Emperor's hands and pushed him through the doors. What awaited him wasn't the brightly lit interior, nor Master Ling Zan's terrifying and blood-splattered visage. The doors and windows had been flung open, and a blustering wind gusted in, snuffing out the row of candles. A layer of black fabric was pulled roughly over his eyes, and the world went dark. Even the sound of fighting faded away as he was led along until at last he heard nothing. What was happening? After calling out for his men twice to no avail, he realized with a cold finality that he was completely at the enemy's mercy. Yet even now, he had an emperor's dignity. He tamped down his fear and panic, silently clenching his teeth to stop himself from crying out. Suddenly, he felt his arms being released. He yanked off the blindfold, but found himself alone, again greeted by a vast expanse of darkness. He looked around, completely lost. The darkness concealed everything. He had no idea where he was. A thin whine echoed in his ears, faint and indistinct, like the cries of wronged souls drifting from beyond the grave of the underworld. The sound was chilling, awakening sorrow and terror in the deepest parts of his heart. The Emperor made no attempt to move forward. Considering his current plight, remaining still was the wisest course of action. The enemy had laid traps in the dark. Stumbling around might put him in grave danger. Until the enemy made a move, he wouldn't make one either. The Emperor could hear his own breathing. Even his heartbeat seemed deafening. His heart pounded faster and faster, and his eardrums pulsed in time. He tried to swallow, but found his mouth parched. The silent torture seemed to go on without end, until even the Emperor's considerable patience reached its limits. Just as he was about to break down and speak, someone blew lightly on the nape of his neck. A gentle sigh sounded behind him. That would be so creepy. Like, I would freak out easily. The Emperor froze. What kind of monster are you? If you bear me some grudge, face me directly. These tricks are the tactics of a petty villain. They deserve only ridicule, he snapped. Your Majesty's unwavering composure in the face of danger is truly admirable. The stranger's voice was soft and slow, a stark contrast to the Emperor's harsh and hurried scolding. Though there was still no light, he seemed capable of perceiving the Emperor's every movement. The Emperor attempted to shift away, but found himself frozen in place. He steadied himself. Who are you? The stranger didn't beat around the bush. Xiao Liu. The pavilion leader of the 13 floors of Yunhai? Though the Emperor's voice held a note of surprise, that wasn't wholly unexpected. I'm sure your Majesty has heard my name from both Feng Xiao and Zhu Buchu. Xiao Lu chuckled and snapped his fingers. A point of light flared to life in front of the Emperor. It gradually expanded into a glowing mass, then split into several scattered clusters that darted to the edges of the space. In the faint light, the Emperor's surroundings began to take shape. Xiao Lu stood before him with a girl at his side. The pavilion leader of the 13 floors of Yunhai was young and handsome, and the girl was lovely. Standing together, the pair seemed a perfect match. It was difficult to imagine that this young man, with his gentle face and a smile curving his lips, had amassed such immense power in the last few years. He'd skillfully gathered masters and forged alliances with the Southern Dynasty, the Gokturks, and even Goguryeo. While he'd yet to pose a significant threat to the Su Dynasty, he'd become a thorn in their side, both in the shadows and out in the open. But the girl's face was the one the Emperor couldn't have been more familiar with. Yuan Yang? He exclaimed in shock. Though his granddaughter bore a surname for which he had no fondness, out of consideration for his daughter, Princess Li Ping, the Emperor had been careful never to mistreat the girl. Who could have imagined she'd been secretly conspiring with the 13 floors, plotting to overthrow the Su Dynasty from behind her mother's skirts? The girl smiled. My name is Yuan Yihuan, Your Majesty. I'm sure you know this as well. All those years ago, the princess gave birth to twin daughters. The Emperor understood at once. You are the child who died? But you didn't die. Yuan Yihuan nodded. Fortunately, my foster brother came to my rescue, or I'd have become a vengeful ghost wandering the underworld. But she was not a ghost, and so there was no reason to fear her. The Emperor felt guilt toward the Yuan clan, but the feeling did not extend to this Yuan Yihuan. He quickly composed himself, his voice regaining its presence and authority. Then I must thank you for rescuing Huan Niang, Pavilion Leader Xiao. I was unaware of her existence until this moment, but now that I know, I could never allow her to remain lost in the world outside the palace. Pavilion Leader Xiao, you provided for Yi Huan and cared for her. I won't hesitate to reward you with gold and silver, a high office, and whatever else you desire. So why must you oppose the court time and time again? Is it worth it to harm others for so little benefit? Your Majesty lives up to your reputation. said Xiao Lu with a smile. You immediately switch from defense to offense, trying to win me over. Is your Majesty truly willing to offer me whatever I desire? The Emperor sensed the trap within his words, but didn't bat an eye. That would depend on whether I can afford it. That would depend on whether I can afford to offer it. Xiao Lu burst into laughter. Your Majesty is wealthy beyond measure. What could you possibly not afford? Isn't it more about whether you're willing to offer it? The highest authority must be held by those with virtue. Xiaolu's mouth twisted with mockery. Virtue? What virtue does the Emperor of Southern Chen possess? His ancestors possessed virtue, said the Emperor coolly. Without virtue, talent, and timing, how could they have attained the throne? Once they are on the throne, if they don't continue cultivating virtue, the blessings of heaven won't last for long. So your Majesty claims to be talented and virtuous, and thus have the mandate of heaven, Xiao Lu said with a shadow of a smile. I've been curious about you for a while, said the Emperor. Your achievements are sufficient to place you among the visionaries and great men. You gathered a group of talented individuals and proved you have the ability to lead them. Why not apply your prodigious talents to righteous pursuits? I can never say that word correctly. Why insist on these shadowy, underhanded schemes? Yang Jian had been born a wealthy member of the nobility. He could have lived a life of comfort and luxury, but he'd nursed grand ambitions. Between his own aspirations and Emperor Wu's suspicion toward him, he gradually found himself walking down the path of usurpation, unable to retreat. But since his ascension, he'd governed with wisdom and benevolence, ensuring peace both within and without his nation, and reforming the previous dynasty's failed policies. While he might have wronged the Yuan clan, he had always done right by the common people. Thus he questioned Xiao Lu with confidence. Who decides what is righteous? Xiao Lu replied. Those who steal bread to fill their bellies are punished, but those who steal kingdoms to feed their ambitions become lords. That's all there is to it. Why try to provoke me? Asked the Emperor solemnly. I acknowledge that I stole the throne from the Yuan family, but if Yuan Yun had governed with sincerity and valued talent, his nation wouldn't have fallen into my hands. The illusions I saw earlier were your doing, were they not? Even if you're unhappy with me, Master Ling Zhang is innocent. I beseech you to let him go. Fear not, we'd never harm an enlightened monk who's pure of soul, said Xiaolu. But it's no use trying to delay, your majesty. Do you know where we are? I did want to ask. We are inside the belly of the Buddha. Dashing Shan Temple's most famous feature was its Mahavira Hall. Inside was a gigantic Buddha statue over 50 feet tall, cast during the Jin dynasty. It had narrowly escaped destruction during Emperor Wu's reign, and after Yang Jian ascended, he'd renovated the temple and had the statue gilded, so covered in gold. The Emperor had previously admired the statue from up close, but he'd never realized its hollow interior was so vast, or even that it was accessible. If Shaolu and Yuan Yihuan had been hiding within the statue, it was no surprise they'd been overlooked despite the strict security and thorough searches both inside and outside the temple. The Emperor considered further. If Shaolu and Yuan Yihuan hadn't entered from inside the temple, did that mean there was a passage beneath the statue that led outside? Xiao Lu watched the expressions playing across the Emperor's face and smiled. Your Majesty is a brilliant man. I trust you've guessed how we arrived. Even if you've hidden a great army in here, it would be impossible to bring them in with no one the wiser, the Emperor said. Your Majesty misunderstands. The sound of fighting you heard from the back courtyard weren't from my men. That was your own men slaughtering each other. Impossible! At this point, there was no more need to hide anything. The gyu was in the ginger soup. As I'm sure you've guessed, there are a number of secret passages hidden beneath these Buddha statues. I had men light hallucination inducing incense within them, which wafted out through the openings in the statues. Sandalwood incense is a strong scent. Once my incense mingled with it, it was hard to detect. The Emperor's expression darkened. So you made Master Ling Zhang do those awful deeds with that incense? Xiao Lu smiled. Everything you saw was an illusion. Ling Zhang is devoted to the impermanence of Buddhism. His heart bears no shadow. The incense is useless on him. All I did was induce him to lie down and rest quietly for a while. After all, my true target was you, Your Majesty. He turned his head and called into the darkness. Are you ready? The Emperor instinctively followed his gaze. His eyes grew wide. A figure stepped forth from the darkness. The man's appearance, stature, clothing, and mannerisms were identical to his own. Xiao Lu smiled brightly. How long do you think you can delay, Your Majesty? So this was why Xiao Lu had so patiently entertained his questions. The impostor had watched everything, observing the subtle nuances of his voice and expressions. Almost there, the impostor said. Please let him speak a few more words, pavilion leader. His voice sounded like it had come from the Emperor's own lips. The Emperor burned with fury. He'd never expected his enemy to have this card up his sleeve. You only have yourself to blame, Your Majesty. Xiao Lu's voice was laden with regret. Your security is too tight. Every time my men tried to infiltrate the palace, they were identified by the Jijian Bureau. I had no choice but to resort to more unconventional methods. Rest assured, once this man takes your place, he'll issue an edict saying you're abdicating and make arrangements for the rest of the Yang clan. Your esteemed name will remain untarnished. The history books will still call your majesty a wise emperor who established the imperial examinations and subdued the Gok Turks. The emperor had resolved not to say another word, but at this he couldn't contain himself. Who will believe this impostor? Do you take the empress and ministers for fools? Xiao Lu smiled. The confidants who supported your ascension, such as Liu Fang and Zhang Yi, are already dead. Then there's the solar eclipse. Clear sign that the heavens themselves deem you guilty for usurping the Yuan clan's throne. Your Majesty spent 3 days in repentance at Da Xingshan Temple, then resolved to follow Emperor Wu's example and abdicate to become a monk. What does it matter if the Empress and ministers don't believe it? It only matters what the common folk do. The Prince of Qin is already in contact with the commander of the Imperial Army. Between them, they'll focus on consolidating military power and earning the trust of the people. As for Empress Dugu, it's unfortunate that she's so ill. She should continue to rest. You're delusional, the Emperor roared. Enough, said the impostor. He stepped up to the Emperor and reached out to touch his face, stroking it as if trying to work out the structure of his bones. Creepy. A chill ran down the Emperor's spine. His face filled with horror, but he found himself unable to move. I. The impostor repeated the word, adjusting his tone each time. Slowly, he erased the last subtle differences between himself and the original until they sounded completely identical. I am Yang Jian, Yang Jian is me. The impostor gave a small smile that chilled the depths of Yang Jian's heart. It's over, he thought in despair. The Buddha statue would muffle all sound within it. No matter how he screamed, no one would come to his rescue. Throughout the ages, death had always been the one inevitability no one could surmount. But the Emperor now realized that what he feared most wasn't the inevitability of his death. It was not knowing what Xiao Lu would do with his face and identity when he was gone. In the darkness behind him, a silent hand stretched out. It wasn't the hand of a savior, but that of a rapier come to claim him. So it's a kind of sword. A dark figure rushed forward, ready to strike the fatal acupoint on the Emperor's back. Xiao Lu's smile vanished as he sprung between them. Stop! Though he'd arranged for someone to impersonate the Emperor of Su, the real one was still useful to him. He had no intention of killing him yet. But the newcomer was merciless. They'd gone for the Emperor's life. Xiao Lu exchanged several blows from the newcomer before he recognized him. Tuan Qinghe! We've never interfered in each other's business before. Why are you starting now? Tuan Qinghe said nothing. He pushed Xiao Lu aside and drew his sword, slashing at the Emperor. His saber chi multiplied 1,000-fold as it flew from his blade, rushing toward both the real and fake emperors. Xiao Lu refused to let Tuan Qinghe succeed, but he could only save one. What he wanted was a puppet. If he was forced to pick, the impostor was more useful. He darted toward the fake. The Emperor watched helplessly as the saber glare tore towards him, cold and sharp and ready to extinguish his life. His chest ached, as if preemptively feeling the pain. In that critical instant, someone grabbed his shoulder and yanked him backward. What lay behind him wasn't the solid ground he'd imagined. A deep pit seemed to have materialized out of thin air. The Emperor teetered on the edge for only a breath before plummeting down into the dark. Yet in that brief moment, he caught a glimpse of the one who'd rescued him. It was the young monk he'd seen beside Master Ling Zhang. I practically became a Buddha myself with how long my venerable self waited for your people to show themselves. The monk laughed heartily, instantly giving away his identity. Xiao Lu and Tuan Qinghe had been engaged in ferocious combat, but the moment Feng Xiao appeared, they set aside their fight and flew toward him. Feng Xiao deflected the strikes with a wave of his sleeves, then grabbed the impostor and held him up as a shield as he slid backward. With a smooth flip of his hand, he tossed the fake emperor after the real one into the pit. Dazed from the fall, the Emperor was startled when another body landed on him, nearly crushing him to death. All right, 1 second. Quick sip. Ooh. Okay. Chapter 183. Feng Xiao hadn't tossed the Emperor into a hole for no reason. He knew the alliance between Xiao Lu and Ku Zhen was tenuous. They were united by their shared desire to overthrow the Su dynasty, yet the closer they came to their goal, the more unstable their partnership would become. This was an opening he could exploit. One side might easily turn on the other, or they might not. But Feng Xiao's faction was exposed, out in the open. Any move they made would be observed. All he could do was wait. During their initial discussions, almost everyone in the Shuiyue and Jijian bureaus had agreed it would be better to take the initiative. They should search the city and cancel the Buddhist ceremony, not sit on their hands and pray for their enemies to destroy each other. Ultimately, it was Chubuchu who commanded everyone to lie low and refrain from taking reckless action. After the incident at the Prince of Qin's banquet, the Jijian Bureau had discovered several key clues to the case. They acted as if they'd found nothing and put on a show of being confused and panicked in order to coax the enemy into letting down their guard. Until today. Chubuchu's grasp of human nature, Feng Xiao's thought, was indeed unmatched. Tuan Qinghe and Xiao Le might not have made names for themselves in the Jianghu, but they were undoubtedly peerless martial artists. Xiao Le's injuries had yet to heal, which put him at a slight disadvantage. But if he and Tuan Qinghe worked together, even the arrogant Feng Xiao dared not claim he could achieve a decisive victory. The impostor emperor thus became the key. The impostor was crucial to Xiao Le's plan. He couldn't let anything happen to him. The moment the impostor was thrown into the pit, Xiao Le abandoned Feng Xiao and rushed forward to rescue him. The emperor had never thought that there was such a vast world beneath Daxing Temple. The bottom of the pit was pitch black. Still crushed under the weight of the fake emperor, he groped at the muddy ground beneath him. The soil was tightly packed, almost certainly the work of some bygone construction project. As far as the emperor could recall, Daxing Temple had undergone renovations twice. Once before Emperor Wu banned Buddhism, and once again after Great Su's establishment. But both had concerned only the building on the surface, reinforcing the temple without delving down into the foundations. These packed earth passages had to be older than the Shou dynasty. He shoved the body on top of him aside and struggled up. The man seemed to have passed out. Even in the dark, the emperor could tell that this was the fake, but he couldn't make out the man's true identity. I mean, I kind of hope he could tell it was the fake, considering he's the real one, but, like, I get what they meant, or what they were trying to convey. It's just kind of funny if you stop and think about it. His first thought was to kill him, but he had no weapon to hand, and he was exhausted. All he managed was a couple dull kicks. The emperor panted harshly, his anger still simmering. How was he supposed to escape this place? Could Feng Xiao extricate himself and save him? What was even happening up there? His mind was in a fog. There was too much he didn't know. He waited a long time, but no one else dropped down from above. He had no choice but to take matters into his own hands. Using the wall to support himself, the emperor straightened with great effort and began to slide himself along the rugged stone. He groped along for a while before noticing something. When he paused to carefully explore the wall a second time, he realized that what he'd touched wasn't merely rough earth. It was a carved mural. By touch alone, he guessed it depicted galloping horses. Some people were leading them, while several others stood with cupped hands. A bodhisattva sat upon a throne of lotus flowers. This was no construction tunnel. It was an underground labyrinth. The emperor knew a fair amount about Daxing Temple thanks to his friendship with Master Ling Zhang, but he'd never known there was a maze like this underneath it. If it stretched out under the entire temple complex, the labyrinth must be massive and was probably riddled with traps and dangers. Cold sweat sprang up on the emperor's back. He stopped walking. Perhaps it would be more prudent to go back above ground and confront Xiao Le. But he didn't know the way back, and there was no guarantee anyone would come to rescue him. A familiar sound echoed around him, coming in starts and stops from all directions at once. It resembled the wail of an infant or the howl of a wildcat, filled with deep resentment and boundless hatred. The Emperor froze, straining to discern the source of this noise. A hand gently landed on his shoulder. I'm not going to try to make that noise because I don't even know where to start. All the blood rushed to his head as he twisted away, trying to shake off the hand gripping him. A voice cut through the darkness, one that was exceedingly familiar. "It's me, Your Majesty." The words were followed by several coughs. Choo-ba-choo! The Emperor's heart was pounding so fiercely that when he tried to speak, he also choked and began to cough. The sound echoed in the darkness. How big is this place? The Emperor wondered. Another voice rang out. Your Majesty. This was a familiar voice as well. The deputy chief of the Shuhui Bureau, Zheng Sun Bodhi. Oh, wrong person. The Emperor calmed his racing heart and gasped. They... Shh. In an incredible breach of propriety, Zheng Sun Bodhi clapped his hand over the Emperor's mouth, cutting him off mid-word. There's a monster in here, Your Majesty. It's best to speak as little as possible, Chubuchu said in a low voice. The Emperor's heart leapt into his throat once more. What kind of monster? How did you get down here? In fact, before the ceremony, Chubuchu had instructed Qin Miaoyu and Ming Yue to enter the palace and search the library for Daxingtian Temple's building plans. The palace library housed a vast collection of books, some as old as the Han Dynasty. Although many of the oldest scrolls had been lost to various wars, a sizable number survived. Locating the plans for a 300-year-old temple in a single night was no simple task. But Ming Yue and Qin Miaoyu had succeeded, locating the plans of the temple in a pile of old papers. They weren't the originals from the Jin Dynasty, which had presumably been lost sometime during the wars and the Jin Dynasty's move south. The earliest preserved versions were from the later Qin Dynasty and detailed the temple's construction history and architectural design. As Daxingtian Temple had been renovated several times since then, these preserved plans differed greatly from the temple as they now knew it. Qin Miaoyu hadn't understood why Chubuchu went to such lengths to acquire the plans. She thought he was grasping at straws, until he pointed out a particular passage in the documents. When the temple's construction began, the emperor ordered the workers to dig an underground labyrinth to protect the 8 treasures. This underground palace is much larger than Mahavira Hall. It connects the inside to the outside, uniting above and below. Just a few stilted lines, short and without context, but they left her scratching her head. What were inside and outside? And what did it mean to unite above and below? Chubuchu knew the emperor would be in the Mahavira Hall during the morning and afternoon ceremonies. He'd be listening to sutras and engaging in worship while his attendants and ministers stood to the side praying and offering incense. Shaolu's attention was sure to be completely focused on the emperor during this time. Thus, early in the day, Chubuchu had brought Zheng Sun and the others to quietly search the area around the temple. All their efforts had paid off when they discovered a hidden tunnel beneath a pile of debris in a narrow alley bordering Jingshan Ward. There were several layers of earth beneath the bricks. The passage hadn't been used recently. It seemed Shaolu's faction hadn't noticed it at all. Upon entering, they discovered that the labyrinth below was just as expansive as Daxingtian Temple above. It had a series of branching connections arranged according to the Bagua, a Taoist symbol consisting of 8 trigrams arranged in an octagon. Each of its 8 sides held a chest containing the sarira of a high monk from the past. All manner of venomous creatures surrounded these precious chests, guarding the treasures within. Chubuchu and Zhang Sun Bodhi plunged into the labyrinth and navigated the various obstacles together. Between them, thanks to both Chubuchu's expertise in arrays and mechanisms, as well as Zhang Sun Bodhi's martial prowess, they managed to evade all the traps and reach the Emperor. But the Emperor no longer remembered where he'd fallen down, and now there was an even greater danger skulking nearby. A monster glowering at them from the darkness, ready to pounce and tear into its prey. "We're not sure what kind of creature it is, only that it's dangerous," said Chubuchu. "It's bizarre, yet intelligent. Even Zhang Sun was not its match. We fled from it. We must prevent it from finding us again." Zhang Sun bit his lip but said nothing. Chubuchu's description was cryptic. He hadn't told the Emperor that the creature wasn't just ferocious. Its appearance was horrifying. Even Zhang Sun had no desire to recall what he'd seen. He was acutely aware of the great danger they were in, and less confident than ever that he could bring them all out to safety. Okay. Okay. All right. 184. The Emperor was quick to adapt to the situation. After listening to their explanation, he gathered his thoughts and forced himself to breathe deeply. Moments ago, he'd been isolated and surrounded by enemies. At least now, he had 2 companions by his side. Following their lead, he lowered his voice to a whisper. "What should we do now, Chu Xiansheng?" Another emperor might have balked at taking commands from his subjects, but Yang Jian was under no illusions. It would be impossible to escape by himself. Zhang Sun may have been the martial artist among them, but the one he trusted most was still Chubuchu. Chubuchu, too, dispensed with the usual courtesies. "Your Majesty, can you remember how you got here?" The Emperor flushed. He'd been in such a panic after falling, it hadn't occurred to him to make note of his route. Let me think." He had an excellent memory. Thinking back over the stone walls he'd touched, he said, "Follow me." Zhang Sun lit no fire, lest it draw the attention of eyes within the darkness. Instead, he placed his hand on the Emperor's arm to guide him. Chubuchu followed a step behind. The Emperor felt along the carvings, recalling the mural he'd found. Men on horse and camel back rode from far and wide to pay their respects to the Bodhisattva, who sat high on a throne of lotuses. The Bodhisattva's fingers were bent in a mudra, their pose exuding an air of untouchable serenity. Auspicious clouds were depicted in the mural. The Emperor's fingers quickly found their stylized whorls, and above the clouds was the Bodhisattva he recalled. Now more confident, he pushed forward. "There was a man impersonating me. He was unconscious just up ahead." "Stay here, Your Majesty. Let me check." Zhang Sun Bodhi left the Emperor to Chubuchu, who put a hand on his shoulder and strode toward the spot the Emperor had indicated. "There's no one here, Your Majesty." How can that be? The Emperor couldn't believe it. The impostor had been out cold. How could he have woken up so quickly? Even if he had, he should have made some kind of noise they would have heard. He took a few involuntary steps forward, as if to verify the impostor's absence himself. Chubuchu's hand slipped from his shoulder. Your Majesty, there are many hidden passages here. We should stay together, Chubuchu cautioned. That man mimicked my voice and appearance so flawlessly even I might have mistaken him for myself. If he escapes, it will spell trouble. The Emperor bent and began to search his surroundings, but found nothing under his fingers beyond coarse sand and stone. He furrowed his brow. Impossible. He distinctly remembered the impostor Emperor falling and landing on top of him. He'd shoved the impostor away, and his head had struck the stone wall. He'd probably bled. The faint scent of blood did linger in the air. The Emperor searched again and felt a small damp patch. So this was the place. But then, where was the fake Emperor? He must be nearby, the Emperor muttered. Perhaps he'd woken up in a daze and simply found a place to hide. There was no reply from Chubuchu and Zhang Sun. Chu Xiansheng, Zhang Sun. How could this be? Just moments ago, Chubuchu and Zhang Sun had been a few steps behind him. They couldn't have failed to hear him. He thrust his hand out and felt something warm. It felt like a bare human foot, the skin rough and craggy as scales. Drip, drip. Water fell from above and dropped onto the Emperor's forehead. He reached up unthinkingly to wipe it away. His fingers came away sticky, stinking of copper. Not water, blood. Wind rushed past his ears and a light flared behind him. The Emperor turned to see Zhang Sun holding a torch. He stiffened in realization and slowly, jerkily looked up at the figure clinging to the ceiling above him. A person. No, it could no longer be called that. The creature had human limbs, but its hair was completely gone. Its face and scalp were crimson, shiny and swollen as if scalded by boiling water. Its skin was riddled with countless holes, through which black and white worms crawled. Where eyes had once resided, there were only 2 hollow sockets filled with flickering blue flames. Its limbs were covered in scales, and its nails were long, blackened, and extraordinarily sharp. The monster stared at the Emperor, who froze like a rabbit beneath the glare of a venomous snake. All the hair on his neck stood up as he looked at those worms. He yearned to shuck his skin and flee, to leave this place so he didn't have to keep looking at the thing. He couldn't speak. All he managed was a wordless gasp. The Emperor thought he'd seen it all. He never imagined a creature like this could exist. No wonder Zhang Sun and Chubuchu had been so cryptic. No one could maintain their composure before such a sight. Belatedly, the Emperor realized his hand was still resting on the monster's foot. His soul almost fled his body in terror, and he yanked his hand back. The monster growled deep in its throat and lunged. It moved as fast as lightning, swiping its sharp claws at the crown of the Emperor's head. A gust of rancid wind rushed toward the Emperor. He had no time to evade. He was going to die. The thought had barely formed when flames erupted between him and the monster. Zhang Sun had thrown the torch while the Emperor stood stunned. The monster recoiled in pain as the torch struck its head. Lord Chief! Zhang Sun Bodhi shouted. There was no response. Chubuchu was nowhere to be seen. The torch fell to the ground, illuminating a suspiciously large pool of blood. Yet, it failed to reveal Chubuchu. The monster gave a low roar and barreled toward them. Zhang Sun shoved the emperor behind him and threw out his palm, pushing this creature back with a blast of wind. He was wary of getting too close. Chubuchu had warned him that the worms crawling over the monster were deadly. If even one or two were to enter his body, he'd be afflicted by the Gyu. The Gyu worms didn't take over their host at once. They lay dormant within the body, waiting for their moment to strike. Those who managed to excise the worms in time, like Pei Jingzi, were few. Most ended up like the residents of Yangdang Mountain Estate, driven to madness by the Gyu invading their minds. At that stage, there was no cure. Made it much more difficult to fight. Zhang Sun could have fled with the emperor, but they still had no idea where Chubuchu had gone. The emperor plastered himself to the wall, afraid to move, and called out again for Chubuchu. There was no response. The monster fought savagely. Zhang Sun was forced to expend more and more energy to block each strike. Suddenly, he realized this creature had its own cunning. It lured them into the depths of the labyrinth, and now it sought to extinguish his true chi. He couldn't stall any longer. The emperor was still beside him, and his safety had to come first. That was both Zhang Sun's duty and Chubuchu's order. Gritting his teeth, Zhang Sun shoved the monster back a few steps. Then he seized the emperor. They sprinted off down the passageway. The monster followed them into the boundless dark. Chubuchu stood in silence with his back to the cold stone wall. He could feel the contours of the stone carvings through his clothes. It was a depiction of a Buddhist tale, the Astasena listening to Buddhist scriptures. Yeah, I think I said that right. Astasena listening to Buddhist scriptures. But he couldn't make a sound around the hand tightly gripping his throat. The face of the person choking him was inches from his own. His breath was light. The occasional puff of warm air fanned over Chubuchu's face. His fingers were slender, yet strong, their skin dry and cool. Chubuchu couldn't make out his silhouette in the darkness, but he knew who this was. This person was using their left hand. A number of Jianghu practitioners were left-handed, but there was only one both present here and hostile to him. Xiao Le. Only when the monster had chased Zhang Sun and the emperor into the distance did Xiao Le loosen his grip. He struck Chubuchu's acupoint, rendering him immobile. We meet again, Chief Chu. It's a pleasure, Pavilion Leader Xiao. They greeted each other like close companions, old friends reunited after years spent apart. There was no hint of animosity. But Chubuchu guessed that if it were up to Xiao Le, he'd never have come down here. It seemed Feng Xiao, throwing the fake emperor down, had forced his hand. Chubuchu could vaguely make out the man slumped nearby. Chubuchu coughed a few times. What was that creature just now? You're so sure I know. It seemed Xiao Le was still in the mood to joke. Chief Chu, you overestimate me. This underground labyrinth was built to house the 8 treasures. Booby traps and various poisons make sense. That creature doesn't. That thing is no beast. It's a living person who's been cast into a pool of goo. After 49 days, their flesh was perforated, and the goo eroded and took control of their body. Now they're a walking corpse, driven solely by the urge to kill. Human Gyu couldn't be made from just anyone. The host had to have a strong physique, preferably that of a martial artist, to withstand the relentless waves of Gyu burrowing through their skin and muscle and into their organs. They could only watch helplessly as their body was riddled with holes until they finally died in agony. Nurturing a monster so sinister and deadly demanded no small effort from its creator. Xiao Le was silent a moment. That human Gyu was once the head disciple of the Nanhua sect, Song Yun Tao. Chubachu was stunned. Kuhi Zen has only been in the Central Plains for a few months. Song Yun Tao has been missing for over 3 years. How did he fall into a Gokturk prince's hands? Xiao sighed. At the time, the Nanhua sect was embroiled in internal strife. The sect leader married a beautiful young woman, but she fell in love with the head disciple, Song Yun Tao. Yun Tao. The leader and his wife clashed, and the sect was fragmented. Alone, Song Yun Tao was out beyond the Great Wall to search for his Shifu, not Shizen. Nothing more was heard from him. Terrible pity. He had great potential and could have revitalized the Nanhua sect, but fate laughed at him, and he perished. Were you involved with this, pavilion leader Xiao? If I said I wasn't, would you believe me? I would, said Jubichu coolly. You have no scruples, but you're not a liar. Xiao smiled. If only you were willing to abandon Sue. You and I would surely become companions capable of reading each other's thoughts. Chubachu ignored this comment. How did you discover this place? Lady Ashina. Chubachu needed only a moment to recall everything connected to this name. The Empress? Correct. 15 years ago, the daughter of Much-chan Kagan, Lady Ashina, married Yuan Yang. The Gokturks were Buddhists, and Lady Ashina had been no exception. At the time, Buddhism's expansive influence had begun to threaten the emperor's authority, and Yuan Yang ordered a crackdown on the religion. He expelled monks from the country, even destroyed several sections of Da Xingshan Temple. It was this last that led to the discovery of the entrance to the labyrinth. Upon learning of it, Lady Ashina had ordered an investigation, but those who entered never returned. And the investigation came to an unsatisfying end. The entrance to the maze was sealed soon after, but it remained on Lady Ashina's mind. She ordered Da Xingshan Temple's plans collected from the library and sent to the Khaganate for examination. I didn't think I'd be this tired, but we're gonna keep going. Chubachu furrowed his brow. So the plan from the Jin dynasty ended up in the hands of the Gokturks, and from there made their way to Kuhizen? Said Xiaolu. Back when the temple was first constructed, the Buddha statues were crafted from wooden sticks and bent reed frames, then secured with a base of white clay and painted. The only exception was the great Buddha in the Mahavira Hall, which is hollow and contains the entrance to the labyrinth. I'd already visited the temple long before your emperor sealed it off. Chubuchu had guessed the enemy would disguise themselves as monks or the emperor's attendants to infiltrate the temple. He'd never anticipated something like an entire secret labyrinth. Xiao Le seemed to sense his thoughts. Surprising, isn't it? But I didn't expect the Gok Turks to choose this moment to turn against me. I thought Kuhizen would at least wait until I had the situation in hand before making his move. But Kuhizen clearly wasn't operating on the same principles. To him, there was little difference between Xiao Le and the Emperor of Su. Both were men he could use to further his plans of sowing discord in the Central Plains. Well then, Pavilion leader Xiao, we're in the same boat. It'd be wise to cooperate, at least until we're out of the labyrinth. Xiao Lu smiled. I agree. Please go ahead. Do you know the way? I don't, said Xiao Lu. Kuhizen never showed me the plans. I must trouble you to guide me. Chubuchu didn't answer. He merely started walking. Xiao Le had tapped the fake emperor's mute acupoint earlier. He lifted the silent man only to I'm going to start that paragraph over. I messed up all of that. Xiao Le had tapped the fake emperor's mute acupoint earlier. He lifted the silent man easily to his feet and followed close behind Chubuchu. The passage was deep and dark, the only sound the tap of their footsteps. The fake emperor, still dazed, stumbled as he walked, his footfalls unpleasantly discordant. Though the fake emperor was a crucial part of his plan, Xiao Lu's treatment of him made it clear how little regard he had for him. This impostor couldn't be a high-ranking member of the 13th floor's. Perhaps he was truly only a puppet. What a puppet thought or felt about Xiao Lu was of no concern to him. It needed only to fulfill its role. The three men edged along the wall, each harboring their own motives, each with their own agendas. Xiao Le let Chubuchu take the lead. If any danger arose, he could use him as a shield. But Chubuchu made no comment. He walked slowly, memorizing each turn. But he quickly realized this was futile. The wall carvings are repeating, he said. What do you mean? Xiao Le arched a brow. When we started walking, I was touching a mural of the Astasena, listening to sutras. Next was a mural of Prince Mahasattva's sacrifice of himself to the tigers, then another tale about the crown prince retrieving treasures from the sea. But now the sequence is repeating. Perhaps there are multiple copies of the same mural? No. If they were copies, I'd find slight differences in the details. But I remember what I touched. They're the same mural. They were going in circles. Xiao Le sighed. I'm starting to regret not asking Kuhizen for the plans to the labyrinth. Then again, even if he had asked, Kuhizen might not have shared them. Chubuchu thought for a moment, then pulled out a torch and lit it. The darkness surrounding them was endless, the flame a small puddle of brightness. Still, by its light, they could see that they were at the edge of a circular hall. Standing in the center, not far from them, was a low stone pillar. If I'm not mistaken, said Chubuchu, the center of the labyrinth symbolizes the yin and yang, heaven and earth, sun and moon. The 8 stars around it embody the 8 trigrams of the Bagua. We passed one when we arrived. It must have been the Sun trigram. As for this one, the central stone pillar shone brilliantly in the torchlight, its white jade surface shimmering with an ethereal and captivating glow. Chubuchu took an involuntary step forward. The fake emperor was similarly entranced. He staggered forward, moving even faster than Chubuchu as he reached out to touch it. Even Xiao Le almost lost himself. He took one step forward, then another. Just as he took his third, he halted in alarm. Xiao Le prided himself on his iron willpower. Even if a heavenly demoness were dancing seductively before him, Xiao Le could close his eyes against the sight. But somehow that white jade tower was causing his self-restraint to unravel. How could this be? It wasn't that his will was weak. There was something wrong with the tower. He slammed his eyes shut. Chubachu's torch was guttering out, its flame flickering. In the wavering torchlight, the white jade tower seemed to emit a crimson glow, eerie and surreal. "Get back!" Chubachu cried. The torch went out. Everything was plunged into darkness. A scream split the air. Ah! If Xiao Le had had to use If Xiao Le had had the use of both hands, he might have grabbed both his companions. But he could only use one. Xiao Le yanked Chubachu backward. By then, it was too late for the fake emperor. Chubachu also reacted swiftly. As soon as Xiao Le pulled him into his arms, he whipped out another torch and lit it. The torch hissed and flared, illuminating the fake emperor. He was bound to the white tower by countless red threads. At least 7 or 8 were coiled around his head and neck, digging into his flesh so deeply that blood welled up as they watched. The threads tightened, and the fake emperor's eyes bulged one final time in death. Xiao Le's and Chubachu's breaths stopped in their throats. They were neither sheltered nor naive. Both had witnessed countless horrors. Yet the death of the impostor was beyond their comprehension. Xiao Le pulled on Chubachu's wrist to bring the torch closer, then took a few steps forward. The red threads are coming out of the walls. He dropped Chubachu's wrist and struck the pillar. It shattered under the force of his true chi, revealing a hollow interior. Here was the source of the threads. The place that must have once held a monk's Sarira now housed a small human-shaped puppet instead. Countless red threads wound around it, and the faint scent of sandalwood wafted toward them. Touching the pillar had triggered the mechanism, releasing both the red threads and the enticing fragrance. Even a true martial expert would struggle to escape its effects, let alone Xiao Le's fake emperor. Chubachu had been close to the tower as well. If not for Xiao Le's timely tug, he likely wouldn't have escaped unscathed. Chubachu bent and examined the pillar, then straightened. Someone's tampered with it. Releasing the human goo in here isn't the only thing Kuhizan did. He's revamped the place. Xiao Le brushed his fingers over the impostor's neck. "How is he?" asked Chubachu. "Beyond saving," said Xiao Le slowly. With the fake emperor dead, Xiao Le's plan had already partially failed. Chubachu should have felt victorious, but seeing as they were trapped here with no guarantee of making it out alive, it would be wise not to provoke Xiao Le overmuch. Who was to say Xiao Le wouldn't feed him to the human goo if he became angry enough? Chubachu coughed and said with feigned sympathy, "Ah, be at peace." The corner of Xiao Le's mouth twitched. Would have been more convincing if you hadn't said it. Chubachu swiftly changed the subject. Kuhizen has turned this place of worship into a purgatory of his own making. We must find a way out, and quickly. Let's go. The words were hardly out of his mouth when he felt a jolt of alarm. Something had shifted beneath his feet. Chubachu looked down. Fine fissures snaked through the earth below him. They widened rapidly, growing from the darkness of a finger to the width of a palm. Xiao grabbed Chubu and leapt toward the wall. The ground beneath the jade pillar split as it collapsed, cracks radiating outward from the center of the chamber. I hope not craps. Be gross. Stones and dirt crumbled away beneath them as they clung to the wall. Xiao gave a muffled grunt. The hand gripping Chubuchu's arm went limp, and they both plummeted down into the dark. All right, I need to stand up for a second because I'm falling asleep, and then I will finish our last 2 chapters, which are not super long, so thankfully. Whew. All right, let's finish this. Chapter 185. Okay. Chapter 185. Neither Chubuchu nor Xiao Lu had known the labyrinth had an entire second floor beneath the first. In the blink of an eye, the situation had changed again. The ground beneath Chubuchu's feet gave way, and he crashed to the floor below, landing heavily on his side. 1 second. Sorry. Okay. The ground beneath Chubuchu's feet gave way, and he crashed to the ground below, landing heavily on his side. Pain exploded through his body. He moaned before he could stop himself. His arm was probably broken, but the agony in his back was even worse. What was more, the fall had aggravated his symptoms. He began to cough nonstop, the taste of metal surging up his throat. He spat out 2 mouthfuls of blood. The only sound in the darkness was harsh panting, both his own and Xiao Lu's. Chubuchu was unable to pull himself up to check on his companion. All he could do was lie on his back and wait for the whirling shadows before his eyes to slow. After a long while, he heard Xiao Lu say calmly, "You're dying." He wasn't mocking or cursing Chubuchu. He could hear it in his breathing. Chubuchu's chest heaved as if he was trying and failing to draw in all the air he could to his body. His heart and lungs must have felt like they were aflame. It wasn't just Chubuchu's organs that were burning up, but the scant bit of life left in him. He'd been born with a fragile body, and his ailments had been aggravated by his circumstances. By all rights, Chubuchu should have died long ago. Yet he insisted on dragging his sickly body along the boundary between life and death, borrowing a full 30 years of life from the heavens. But what was borrowed must one day be repaid. And for this man who defied his fate, the price was unbearable, bone-rending agony. Xiaolu understood Chubuchu had spent most of those 30 years in perpetual suffering. He had never known a day of peace. Even on his good days, the tranquil existence of any normal person was forever beyond his reach. What kept Chubuchu going through this torment? This Xiaolu didn't understand. If Chubuchu was doing everything for the sake of others, how was he able to hold on? It was a question he had always wanted Chubuchu to answer. After all, their situations were almost identical, to the point that even now they appeared as eerie mirrors of each other. When Chubuchu replied, his voice was very quiet. I know. Had it not been for Xiaolu's extraordinary hearing, he might have missed those words within the stillness of the cave. Chubuchu succumbed to another long fit of coughing. Xiaolu could almost picture him, hunched over, the coughs wrenching his body, as though he was about to expel his very heart and lungs through his mouth. Chubuchu's life was like a guttering candle flame, poised to extinguish itself at any moment. Occasionally it flared brighter, but that was merely a fleeting illusion, final blinding spark before inevitable death. Unless heaven granted him some miracle. But that was impossible. He used every ounce of strength in his body to draw in his next breath, then his next, struggling against the searing pain in his chest as he clung to consciousness. Within the vast expanse of darkness and treachery, one person rose in his mind's eye. All right, so we actually have super sad pictures, honestly. I'll make sure the bottom is clear. So, it's life. Hi. Hang on. There we go. He's fading. Okay. Someone born into privilege, untouched by hardship, and graced with both striking beauty and a flamboyant personality. Thanks to this man, Chubuchu had discovered the true meaning of living in the sunlight. Every time he drew near, Chubuchu felt a step closer to the exhilarating world of life, even if that man was neither gentle nor kind and challenged him at every turn. He often found himself diverting his attention to deal with the traps this man set for him. It was a constant irritation, yet it breathed life into his days. Of course, he'd never share these thoughts with him. That man would spend the rest of his life gloating and rubbing it in his face. For the sake of his years, it was better to say nothing. He didn't know how long he drifted like this until the pain subsided enough for him to prop himself on his elbows. He laboriously pulled out a torch and lit it. In the dim light, all he could see clearly was the ground beneath them, riddled with deep cracks. At first glance, it appeared the earth had fractured in some violent tremor, but a closer look revealed a more sinister origin. The cracks seemed alive, overlapping and swirling in an unending pattern. Even a brief glimpse left him dizzy and on the verge of collapse in his current state. He settled himself and averted his eyes. He could barely hold himself up as it was. There's an array on the ground. He coughed again. How much do you know about the labyrinth? Xiaolu didn't respond. It struck Chubuchu that Xiaolu had been silent for some time now. Xiaolu? Came a low grunt. Chubuchu frowned. Are you all right? If something happened to Xiaolu, it'd be even harder to escape. I've been poisoned. Shaolu's sigh floated over, so light Chubuchu at first suspected he was lying. He paused. How were you poisoned? When we fell, there was poison on the walls. If you doubt me, come look for yourself. Chubuchu was silent. Shaolu laughed. What? You still think I'm lying to you at this time like this? I know you're dying, said Chubuchu flatly. It's taking all my strength. I know I'm dying, said Chubuchu flatly. It's taking all my strength just to talk to you. Shaolu sighed once more. Slowly he rose to his feet and approached Chubuchu. They had fallen a little distance apart. He trod carefully, feeling his way forward with each step. A sharp hiss erupted from the ground. Chubuchu raised his torch to see Shaolu leap up as spikes shot from the stone beneath his feet. Dodging the spike should have posed no problem for Shaolu. Yet Chubuchu could see a sluggishness to his movements, which was nowhere near as fluid as before. Shaolu evaded the spikes by hair's breadth, narrowly avoiding being turned into a meat skewer. He arrived at Chubuchu's side and slowly settled down on the floor. His breathing was labored and shallow. He stretched out his hand. In the flickering light, Chubuchu could see the red and purple splotches on Shaolu's palm. Some were already beginning to turn black. Stunned, Chubuchu suddenly recalled how Shaolu had pulled him away from the jade pillar. When they'd fallen, he must have pushed off the wall with his palm. Why didn't you expel the poison? Shaolu sighed. Because I'm already suffering from another deeper poison. He used his blackened hand to roll up the sleeve of his other arm. A shriveled, twig-like arm emerged, emaciated and wrinkled and as slender as a chopstick. Though Chubuchu had seen it before, it sent a chill down his spine. An arm like that shouldn't belong to a living person, especially not a man like Shaolu. But that wasn't what Shaolu wanted to show him. He continued to roll up his sleeve. Where his withered arm gradually thickened and transitioned to healthy flesh, the skin was tinged a sickly purple-black. What is it? The poison I was born with. My martial training kept it suppressed over the years, but during my last fight with Feng Xiao, I sustained severe injuries and almost entered qi deviation. You must have sensed my injuries have yet to fully heal. My martial arts skills have only recovered to around 6 or 7/10 of their original state. I can no longer suppress the poison. The first poison had already begun to spread, and now Shaolu had been exposed to another. It was remarkable he had avoided the spikes at all. What's the worst-case scenario? Shaolu smiled. This is the worst-case scenario. There's only one road available to me. Death. You could have chosen not to create this mess and concentrated on recovering instead, said Chubuchu coldly. It's too late for that, said Shaolu. After my seclusion failed, I had no illusions about the condition I was in. I couldn't break through in my martial arts, and the poison had already spread. I couldn't advance any further. No matter what I do, only death awaits me now. The best I can do is make sure all my years of planning come to fruition before I pass away. I can fulfill my lifelong wish. Chubuchu sneered. Your lifelong wish is to harm others. Shaolu began to cough. Perhaps the poison was acting up. He didn't respond to Chubuchu, but instead closed his eyes and began meditating to regulate his breathing. Chubuchu tossed him a porcelain vial, which he caught with a steady hand. Ice fungus pills, said Chubuchu. They'll slow the spread of your poison. If you doubt me, you don't have to take them. Xiao Le opened the vial, sniffed its contents, and tipped his head back, emptying all the pills into his mouth. They were in the same boat. There was no reason to suspect each other. Soon enough, Xiao Le did feel stronger. Your medicine is quite effective. Enough. Let's get out of here. Xiao Le took the torch from his hand and pulled out a long needle. He pierced the slim torch with it, then tossed it into the darkness. The needle arced through the air with the torch attached, then embedded itself in the stone wall on the opposite side of the cavern. Before the light snuffed out, both Chubuchu and Xiao Le caught a glimpse of the general shape of their surroundings. Their faces showed identical expressions of disbelief. Feng Xiao and Tuan Qinghe had been fighting for nearly half an hour. Neither could kill the other. Even injuring their opponent was proving difficult. Tuan Qinghe had quickly realized that Feng Xiao's martial arts had grown even more refined since their fight the previous night on Chang'an Street. He was discomfited. Martial arts depended not only on natural talent and a strong foundation of training, but also on sudden, spontaneous leaps in insight. Even mediocre martial artists struggled to make such significant progress in a few days, never mind martial artists of their caliber. Progressing a step, even half a step, was excruciatingly difficult and depended on timing, environment, and fortuitous encounters with mentors or opponents. Yet Feng Xiao had managed it. Either he'd held back during their previous confrontation, or he'd somehow gleaned new insight within the span of a day. How could that be possible? Tuan Qinghe cleared his mind of all distractions. He and Feng Xiao were evenly matched, with the same odds of victory. The victor would therefore be determined through sheer strength. Both noticed someone approaching on the periphery of their battle, but neither paid the newcomer any mind. It was Yuan Yihuan, the girl who'd been with Xiao Le. Instead of pursuing the false suit emperor alongside Xiao Le, she'd chosen to remain. Although their speed made it impossible for her to see them clearly, she watched every move they made rapt. Xiao Le had taught Yuan Yihuan all the martial arts she knew. She was of middling aptitude, but though she could never hope to equal his accomplishments, having an excellent teacher was a great advantage. If she were to wander the Jianghu, she might not climb to the top, but she'd still carve out a place among the upper ranks. She stilled her breathing, minimizing her aura to avoid drawing Feng Xiao's notice. The next time the two men's palms met, Yuan Yihuan saw her chance. She leapt at Feng Xiao's back, light flashing from her sleeve. Wait 1 sec. Ah! I'm getting attacked by the Kleenex box. Okay. 186. Yuan Yihuan was determined to succeed. The hidden weapon in her sleeve shone with internal energy as it sliced toward the middle of Feng Xiao's back. She was only 3 inches from Feng Xiao when Tuan Qinghe, embroiled in battle with Feng Xiao, suddenly fell back. Feng Xiao spun and floated upward, and the hidden weapon in Yuan Yihuan's sleeve sliced through empty air. She'd missed. Her eyes widened in disbelief. I won't use underhanded tactics to achieve my victory, Tuan Chinghe's cold voice echoed in her ears. She abandoned her attack to evade Feng Xiao's deadly strike. But how could she hope to escape? Sharp pain pierced her back. Yuan Yihuan's body flew like a kite with its string snapped, crashing heavily to the floor. She'd activated her true qi in time to protect her life, but her organs were damaged, her strength depleted. She raised her head and coughed up a few mouthfuls of blood, chest heaving as she glared at Feng Xiao and Tuan Qinghe. Bit by bit, she edged backward. Tuan Qinghe, you betrayed my brother! His alliance is with Kuhizan, not me. Tuan Qinghe gazed back at her. His eyes were empty of emotion. He looked at her as one might at a tree or a stone. Feng Xiao raised his hand for the finishing blow. I know what Kuhizan planted beneath the temple, Yuan Yihuan shouted. If you want to save Chubuchu, spare my life. Feng Xiao froze. Seizing her chance, she sliced open her brow and shoved a black worm into the bloody wound. She turned and leapt unhesitatingly into the pit below, moving so fast even Feng Xiao was a heartbeat behind. He jumped unthinkingly after her. Wait! Tuan Qinghe's expression shifted. He hadn't contributed to Kuhizan's refashioning of the labyrinth, but he was aware of the effort the prince had put into it. Kuhizan had hoped to lure everyone to their deaths inside. Even their souls would be trapped for all eternity. Tuan Qinghe couldn't bear to watch Feng Xiao go to his death. To him, Feng Xiao was a rare and precious thing, a truly worthy opponent. Enemies could be found anywhere, but an opponent like this should be cherished. By the time he cried out, Feng Xiao had already disappeared from sight. Tuan Qinghe's expression flickered through myriad emotions before settling itself in determination. He leapt after him. The light of the torch had flashed, then faded, revealing an indistinct scene. Not far from Chubuchu and Xiaolu was a low bronze dais. Atop it, a bronze pillar crawling with intricate carvings stretched towards the ceiling. The torch had flown too fast for them to see much more than that. They'd had time to register only one additional thing. At the foot of the pillar, thousands of bones piled up like small hills. Long since stripped of their original color, they appeared gray and black, shocking in their sheer quantity. Daxingshan Temple was a site of Buddhist worship. How could there be so many bones here? No matter how extraordinary Kuhizan might be, he couldn't possibly create this many corpses in just a few days. The ground they stood upon had been part of the capital for many dynasties. An ossuary of this size was inconceivable, unless the labyrinth was far older than any of them had imagined. All around the bronze platform, countless cracks snaked across the ground, extending beyond Chubuchu and Xiaolu's feet. This place must have once been an altar of the ancients, Xiaolu hazarded. Maybe it sank due to the ground caving in, or maybe it was originally built underground. Either way, it was lost to time, leaving future generations unaware of its existence. The temple must have been constructed later. Or perhaps the first abbot of the temple knew of its existence and built the temple here to suppress evil through compassion, Chubuchu said. We can speculate later. We need to figure out how to get out of here. Xiaolu smiled wryly. Don't expect too much from me. I'm not much better off than you. I'll be lucky to make it out on my own, let alone bring you with me. Chubuchu coughed. But you are cleverer than most. That's enough. If I go insane in a moment, remember to return me to my senses. All right, said Xiaolu. Chubuchu lit another torch. He pushed down his nausea and dizziness and stared down at the cracks on the ground. The lines radiated outward in ripple-like patterns. Each ring was perfectly aligned and none overlapped. The pattern held an allure like shimmering water, magnified, drawing the eye to it again and again. As he watched, the cracks began to move like living things. They rose from the ground, the chaotic pattern ordering itself until the many fissures slowly converged into a familiar object. Although Chubachu had encountered it only a few times, he knew it well. The Jade of Heaven Lake. If there was anything in the world capable of reversing his fate and prolonging his life, it was this legendary jade. But this priceless, one-of-a-kind treasure had already been consumed by Shaolu. Could there be a second one? It wasn't impossible. This labyrinth had a history that far predated Da Xingshan Temple. If one of the ancients had hidden a treasure here, perhaps it had remained undiscovered all this time. The translucent stone shimmered with an inner light, green shading toward blue, like the reflection of the starry sky glinting within a tranquil lake. Its vibrant glow caught and captivated the eye. Even the most resolute man would struggle to resist the allure of such a wonder. Chubachu stared intently at the jade of Heaven Lake. He closed his eyes, then opened them. His nails bit hard into his palms. Yet the jade did not disappear. It hovered quietly, just within reach. Chubachu's fingers twitched toward the jade. With this, he wouldn't need to worry about dying. He might even enjoy decades more. Even if his health remained poor, he'd be alive. And as long as he lived, there was hope. He could continue basking in the sun's warmth, plotting against Feng Xiao and gloating over his victories. He could protect more people like his mother, those who were kind and vulnerable, because he was Chubachu, hard-hearted and ruthless. His fingertips were a breath away from the stone. Alarm rose in his heart, a jangling sense of wrongness. Chubachu couldn't say what prompted it, only that it was like an invisible thread tied around his finger, tugging him to a stop for a brief moment. He bit his tongue, and the sharp tang of blood surged into his mouth, bringing a sudden clarity amid the pain. He realized there was no jade of Heaven Lake in front of him. His hand hovered before a venomous snake, head reared and staring at him with glowing green eyes. Its tongue flicked out in and out as it waited for him to deliver itself into its venomous jaws. Chubachu froze. The snake remained motionless too, as if waiting to see who would falter first. Chubachu eased a hand into his lapels. Lightning fast, the snake struck. Chubachu flung out his hand. The snake hissed and twisted away mid-lunge, wary of the realgar powder Chubachu had thrown. He had made thorough preparations before entering the labyrinth. Both he and Zhangsun Boji were carrying sachets of realgar, effective at warding off most ordinary snakes and insects. Clearly, the sachet was insufficient against a venomous snake for a century old. Exercising the utmost caution, Chubachu had tasked Deputy Chief Song Liang Chen with finding a secret formula. It included realgar, mugwort, and cinnabar, pure substances full of yang energy that were perfect for countering yin creatures. The venomous snake slithered off into the darkness and vanished from sight. Peril temporarily averted, Chubachu lit the torch again and looked around for Shaolu. Chubachu had been caught in danger unawares, yet Shaolu hadn't uttered a word of warning. They were sworn nemeses. Shaolu would have no issue sitting back and watching him die, but such inaction was exceedingly foolish in their current predicament, and Shaolu was no fool. When Chubachu caught sight of him, his face fell. Xiao was a short distance away. At some point, he descended the bronze dais and was now staring at the central pillar. His head was tilted back, his face filled with longing. The winding pattern on the pillar now became clear. What they had taken for intricate carvings were instead countless snakes coiled around the bronze surface. Some reared and flicked their tongues, while others twined around each other as they slithered in circles. Their scales glinted in the torchlight, sending shivers down Chubachu's spine. Yet Xiao seemed completely oblivious as he approached the pillar. Xiao! Chubachu rushed forward and felt his foot sink as he trod on a hidden trigger buried in the fissures on the ground. The air instantly filled with the whistle of arrows. There was nowhere to run or hide, and Chubachu's reactions were too slow to evade. The arrows were inches from them as he grabbed Xiaolu's arm. The moment he touched him, Xiaolu shuddered violently and spun, snatching Chubachu and leaping into the air. Chubachu's feet left the ground just as the arrow shot through the space he'd occupied a heartbeat ago. They whirled past, grazing his clothes and shoes. One tore the fabric at his shoulder, missing his skin by a whisper. Xiao released him, and the two collapsed to the ground in an ungainly heap. Xiaolu's breathing was heavy. It was clear he no longer had the strength to carry Chubachu. A few snakes on the pillar died under the rain of arrows nailed to the bronze surface. Others, startled, darted in all directions, including toward Chubachu and Xiao. There was no time to speak. They struggled to their feet, stumbling as they dashed away. The torch tumbled to the ground, illuminating the cracks below. Chubachu's eyes widened in realization. "Take me with you, but follow my directions," he cried. Xiao didn't hesitate. He seized Chubachu's arm, gathering all his energy, and leapt. With a tap of his toes against the stone, he dodged the wave of snakes below. Up a Qian, down a Kun, to the upper left Dui, 10 steps. Kan, 6 steps. Zen, 8 steps. Xiao was a man of wide and varied knowledge. He understood exactly what Chubachu was doing, calling out directions using the 8 trigrams of the Bagua. Qian, no, not north. It's up. Forward and straight up. The two leapt into the air and landed in a cave concealed in the stone wall. Xiao was completely drained of strength. He pressed himself against the wall with no thought for any potential poison. His brow was drenched in sweat, his face as pale as a ghost. Chubachu wasn't much better off, but at least he hadn't been the one using true qi only moments before. After taking a moment to recover his strength, Xiao whispered, "How did you know there was a cave here?" "The Yellow River diagram," Chubachu said. "The array was likely modeled after it. Even if death lies everywhere, where death and life meet, there must be a path out. That's the secret." Closing his eyes, he recalled his vision of the jade of Heaven Lake. The fissures forming the jade had scattered and rearranged themselves into the shape of this diagram, an ancient cosmological map familiar to anyone who studied geomancy. "I saw a hint within the illusion earlier. Those fissures look random, but if you took each out separately and rearranged them, they'd form the Yellow River diagram." Xiao was silent for a moment, then smiled wryly. "You're better at arrays than I am. Seems Fan Yun held something back when he taught me." "No," said Chubachu. "He treated you the same as he did me. If anything, you had his favor. He taught you more than me, not less. But your heart wasn't in it." Xiao was extraordinarily intelligent and capable, yet he was also ambitious. And ambitious individuals often shared a common flaw. They set their goals unreasonably high. For them, these arts were mere stepping stones. They felt no need to dedicate themselves to such pursuits, so they paid less attention. You're right. Xiaolu didn't deny it. What did you see when you looked at that pillar? Xiaolu paused. Everything I've ever wanted. Fame, power, an able body. Being born into a prosperous family, climbing the ranks on my own merits. Seizing the throne and replacing the Emperor of Chen. Governing across the Yangtze from your Su. And finally, achieving my goal of unifying the land. Your obsession runs too deep, said Chubuchu coldly. He had no interest in conversing further. When he felt somewhat recovered, he rose to observe his surroundings. The cave they had landed in was clean, but very small, with hardly any room to move around. One side was open and dropped down to the bronze dais. The remaining 3 sides were solid stone. One in particular was suspiciously smooth, suggesting it was the work of human excavation. Chubuchu crouched down, running his fingers along the base of the wall until he found a narrow crack that confirmed his suspicions. This wall wasn't naturally formed. It was a man-made stone door. Groping blindly, he located the trigger, a stone ball which he pushed into the corner. With a rumble, the stone door slowly began to rise. Chubuchu realized his companion had gone still. Xiaolu. I fear I won't be leaving this place, Xiaolu said calmly. If I can, said Chubuchu, so can you. In this at least, I'm not like you. The poison has seeped into my bones. Even the jade of Heaven Lake's essence I absorbed is useless. What will you do? I cannot escape death. Perhaps it's better if I pass the jade of Heaven Lake's essence on to you. You still have a glimmer of hope. The Xiaolu I know would never give up until the final moment. For me, this is the final moment. Carrying you here exhausted the last of my strength. I can't even stand. My legs are numb. Xiaolu smiled. There's just one problem. My body is full of poison. I can't guarantee you won't be poisoned as well if I transfer the essence to you. Chubuchu frowned. Chubuchu, said Xiaolu, do you dare take a gamble? And that is the end of chapter 186, and that is where we'll be ending tonight. Thank you for listening to the re-recorded part 6 of book 5 of Peerless. This one, thankfully, was a lot smoother, and I hope a lot better, and that you enjoy and have a great evening. I will see you next time. Good night, everybody.